Shaktikanta Das మాట్లాడుతున్నారు లైవ్ లో చూద్దాం.
Investment demand is picking up and is evident from the robust growth of domestic production and import of capital goods in July and August. Bank credit has grown at an accelerated pace of 16.2% year on year as on September 9th, as against 6.7% during the corresponding period of last year. Total flow of financial resources from banks and non-banks to the commercial sector has improved significantly to rupees 9.3 lakh crore in this financial year so far, that is up to September 9th, from 1.7 lakh crore in the corresponding period of last year. So this year the flow of commercial resources is 9.3 lakh crore compared to last year figure of 1.7 lakh crore for the same period. According to the RBI survey, seasonally adjusted capacity utilization of the manufacturing sector improved from 73% in the fourth quarter of 21-22 to 74.3% in the first quarter of 22-23, and this is in fact the highest level in 3 years. Last time I had given that the decline, I had given the unadjusted capacity utilization which had improved. That's what I had stated in the last monetary policy meeting, but I think it's always better that we and that reflected the seasonal pattern. So therefore I think it is always better to look at the seasonally adjusted figures, and that is what I have attempted to provide today. Non-oil, non-gold imports remained resilient, indicating sustained revival in domestic demand. Merchandise exports growth, however, faced headwinds from unsettled external environment. In the supply side, the agricultural sector remains resilient. The monsoon rainfall was 7% above the long period average as on 29th September. Kharif sowing was 1.7% above the normal sown area as on 23rd September. The production of Kharif food grains as per the first advance estimate is only 0.4% below the first advanced estimate of last year. The reservoir levels are at 87% of the full capacity on 29th September as against the decadal average of 77%. This augurs well for the ensuing Rabi crop. Now we decided to provide all these numbers so that there is clear communication about where exactly we stand in the agricultural front. Industrial activity as reflected in the growth of index of industrial production slipped to 2.4% in July. India's manufacturing purchasing managers index, that is PMI, the manufacturing PMI, however, indicates sustained expansion at 5.2 in August. Business sentiment as reflected in the manufacturing PMI strengthened with the degree of optimism at its highest in 6 years. Service sector indicators point towards strong growth in July and August. Services PMI rebounded to 57.2 in August from 55.5 in July. Business confidence rose to a 51-month high. So I have first provided where we stand with regard to aggregate demand, where we stand with regard to aggregate supply, and within that I have focused on the agriculture sector, the industry sector, and the services sector indicators. Now looking ahead, all these factors should support aggregate demand and activity. The headwinds from extended geopolitical tensions, tightening global financial conditions, and possible decline in the external component of aggregate demand can pose downside risks to growth. Taking all these factors into consideration, which I have just narrated, real GDP growth for the current financial year 2022-23 is now projected at 7%, with second quarter at 6.3%, third quarter at 4.6%, and the fourth quarter at 4.6%, with risks broadly balanced. The growth in the first quarter of next financial year, that is 23-24, is projected at 7.2%. I would now like to focus on inflation. Global geopolitical developments are weighing heavily on the domestic inflation trajectory. Inflation inched up to 7% in August from 6.7% in July. Acute imported inflation pressures felt at the beginning of the financial year have eased but remain elevated across food and energy items. Edible oil price pressures are likely to remain contained on improved supply from key producing countries and measures taken by the government. Going forward, there could be some tapering of selling price increases on account of easing supply conditions and softening of industrial metal and crude oil prices. With services activity showing strong rebound and some improvement in pricing power, risks of higher pass-through to input costs, however, do remain. There are also upside risks to food prices. Cereal price pressures is spreading from wheat to rice due to likely lower kharif paddy production. The lower sowing of kharif pulses could also cause some pressures. The delayed withdrawal of monsoon and intense rain spells in various regions have already started to impact vegetable prices, especially tomatoes. These risks to food inflation could have an adverse impact on inflation expectations. The Indian basket crude oil price was around 104 barrel in the first half of this year 22-23, and this is the actual number which has been realized. In the first half of this year, the Indian basket price was, the average was around $104 US dollars per barrel. Going forward, we are now assuming it to be $100 per barrel in the second half of this year. Taking into account these factors, the inflation projection